this bill.
I call Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to start my contribution by giving a sincere congratulations to the new Minister and wish her the best in her role. I'd further like to work towards a friendly relationship by sincerely thanking the likes of Mr Hudson and other backbench National MPs who have contributed to this evening. Their short spin contributions has given me ample time to make a full contribution this evening, of which I am truly grateful. Sir, the Minister spoke about the Select Committee being a robust process over the period, and it was a robust process because it was split 50-50 in terms of those representing the people of New Zealand on that committee. So it was very robust, but it was only those in the opposition parties who were actually doing their job and listening to not only actually industry submitters, but the officials who gave information to the government. It seems in having this bill brought forward this evening that the government has decided to not, in fact, do the same. The new Minister seems to have ignored that advice of her own officials, and it does not seem to be a portentous start to her new role. The Minister's description of the change in what she describes as a contribution to the lattice work of the her discretionary powers will achieve absolutely nothing. It will harm business. And already, if this bill passes, let's be very straightforward about what that will do. It is clear, sir, that business will immediately have to manage new risk in making business decisions, because that is what this bill does, and I hope to have the time to go into detail of how that is being achieved, unfortunately, through this legislation. I would like to actually just highlight the contribution of the Chair of the Commerce Committee. She, in her contribution, sir, seemed to imply that by making these changes, we were complying with WTO requirements. So we already comply with WTO requirements, and further to that, our compliance is very discretionary in terms of our anti-dumping commitments under the WTO system. So what the Chair said didn't seem to ring true for me, Mr Chairman. I would like to address Mr Hudson's contribution, but truly I can't be bothered. So, this bill was drafted in response to the cost of building materials in New Zealand, with particular significance to the Canterbury earthquakes. A pragmatic parliamentary response to the Canterbury earthquakes at a time permitted dump goods, sir. Now, what that statement means is, at the time, the government reacted with the assistance of Parliament to actually enable the importation of goods at what we would normally define as a dumped price, sir. It happened. It's happened already. Parliament had the power to act, and it did so. But that does not mean that this argument now is a sound one. So a well-rounded and comprehensive system of countervailing duties helps to ensure that there is a level playing field for New Zealand businesses. And so it is important that we look at this countervailing system. But we did that. We got past the first reading, and then we heard from the experts, sir. And it was then that this whole process should have ended, and it should have ended abruptly, and the Minister should have gone away and started again. Where foreign producers, sir, benefit from subsidies, or where they dump products at below domestic prices here in New Zealand, harming our local businesses and industries, New Zealand First will always oppose this. I stand here now in what appears to be a combined stand by this side of the House, sir, to stand against what appears to be blatant stupidity, to be quite honest. Sir, the chorus of feedback from industry and expert advisors to the Select Committee and to MPs directly has been unanimous as far as I can tell. And I use this one quote for illustration. The net effect will enable dumping with no real recourse for local manufacturers. So away from the backroom, government officials and out in the real world, there is no debate. This bill will weaken protection for New Zealand producers. There has been no debate. There's only been a facile argument from that side of the House. The most damaging issue was the introduction of the Consumer Interest Clause. It is timely to remind ourselves what it is we're talking about here, and we are talking about measures to stop what we call dumping, which is where foreign producers can bring goods into New Zealand at lower prices, not because they're more efficient, not because they're more expert, not because they have larger scales of production necessarily, but because they've had assistance from their own governments, subsidies. So that's what we're trying to stop. We're not trying to stifle competition from around the world, although it seems that that is becoming a harder and harder argument to have. But we're saying don't bring in these goods because you guys over there have not played by the rules. So, as Business New Zealand said, in fact, we depend significantly on international trade and we follow WTO rules. In all countries we export to, this bill would make New Zealand-made products vulnerable to unfair, predatory pricing by international competitors. That is the simple fact of it, sir. This bill will affect the innovation of small business, the small Kiwi business that already has to compete around the world, and all they really have is their Kiwi smarts, their entrepreneurship, and the reduction of costs. But no, what this government will do with this legislation is add another barrier in terms of uncertainty and risk. Those businesses will suffer unduly, especially and most clearly those businesses in our manufacturing and export-oriented sector. Let's be very clear in the House tonight. The government officials have acknowledged that the test that will be applied to determine consumer interest will be intrinsically subjective. And I quote, that this subjectivity will impose a cost on business as investment decisions will have to factor an additional level of uncertainty into their risk and return calculations, Mr. Speaker. New Zealand First, along with colleagues across this side of the House, are absolutely opposed to the implementation of this process, sir. So, New Zealand companies are disadvantaged by the uncertainty as soon as this bill passes, and I said that before. Literally, as soon as this bill passes through all parts in this House and becomes law, that will create a level of uncertainty. We have observed, as others have noted, sir, that the Australian government has refused twice already to make similar changes to their anti-dumping legislation, and for the very same reasons we outline here tonight. The Aussies, not the sharpest tools in the chest, rejected it twice, and in so doing, what that National Party needs to be cognizant of is that what they're doing now is opening up a window for the Australian economy, because in passing this legislation and in trying to counter the uncertainty, New Zealand businesses will almost invariably move to Aussie, because they know what the rules are, they know what the outcomes will be, and they know how they can best protect their business from dumping practices, sir. That is the reality of this situation. Submitters were overwhelmingly opposed to this bill, warning that it would be likely to tilt the playing field in favour of dumped or subsidised imports rather than supporting local producers and jobs. The New Zealand government won't support domestic producers, but New Zealand First will. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Simon O'Connor.
How does one follow a speech like that? Indeed. We'll give it a crack. Mr. Speaker, very pleased to take a call on this.